You're smarter than me. You knew this. You were always 2 steps ahead of me, weren't you? I used to think I understood everything. I believed I could predict what would happen next, read every situation correctly, and always stay in control. I convinced myself that I knew what people were thinking before they even spoke. Confidence became my armor, and pride quietly became my weakness. Then you came into my life. At first, I underestimated you. You didn't speak loudly. You didn't need attention. You never tried to prove that you were the smartest person in the room. While everyone else rushed to make themselves seen, you quietly observed everything around you. You listened more than you talked. You noticed details that everyone else ignored. I mistook your silence for uncertainty. I couldn't have been more wrong. Now, looking back, I realize something that I refused to admit before. You were always 2 steps ahead of me. Every conversation we had, every choice you made, every moment I thought I had figured you out, you already knew exactly where things were going. I was reacting. You were preparing. I thought I was leading. You were already waiting at the finish line. The funny thing is, you never made me feel foolish. You never laughed when I made mistakes. You never reminded me that you were right. You simply allowed life to teach me lessons that you had already learned long ago. At the time, I couldn't understand why you stayed calm while everyone else panicked. When problems appeared, I rushed to fix everything immediately. I searched for answers, blamed circumstances, and exhausted myself trying to control outcomes. You didn't. You would pause, think, observe, then act. Back then, I thought you were moving too slowly. Now I realize you were moving wisely. There's a difference. Anyone can move fast. Very few people know when to wait. You did. That's why your decisions almost always worked out better than mine. You weren't lucky. You were patient. Patience isn't weakness, it's intelligence wearing the face of peace. There were moments when I thought you were missing opportunities because you refused to chase everything that looked exciting. Now I understand. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. Some distractions were the costume of opportunity. You recognized that. I didn't. While I was busy proving myself to people who never appreciated me, you were quietly building a life that didn't require anyone's approval. You knew something I didn't. Validation is temporary. Character lasts forever. You never competed with anyone. You competed with yesterday's version of yourself. That alone placed you ahead of everyone else. Sometimes I wonder if you could already see the mistakes I was about to make. Maybe that's why you asked certain questions. Maybe that's why your advice sounded strange at the time. Maybe that's why your silence became louder than anyone else's words. You weren't trying to control my choices. You simply understood consequences better than I did. Experience had already taken you where I was trying to go. You knew the road. I insisted on finding my own. Life eventually brought me back to every lesson you tried to teach. Not because you forced me. Because truth has a way of waiting patiently until we're finally ready to accept it. I remember thinking I had everything figured out. Looking back now, that confidence wasn't wisdom, it was ignorance pretending to be certainty. Real wisdom asks questions. Pride claims to have all the answers. You questioned everything. I questioned almost nothing. That's why your perspective continued growing while mine stayed trapped inside assumptions. You saw patterns where I saw coincidences. You noticed motives where I saw random behavior. You recognized warning signs long before anyone else. I called you overly cautious. Then everything happened exactly the way you predicted. Not once, not twice, again and again. That's when I finally stopped asking how you always knew. Instead, I started asking what I had been missing. The answer surprised me. I wasn't paying attention. I was listening only to respond. You listened to understand. I watched actions. You watched intentions. I believed words. You believed consistency. There's a reason people trusted you. Not because you promised perfection. Because you lived with integrity. People can argue with opinions. They struggle to argue with character. You never needed dramatic speeches. Your life spoke for you. I spent years trying to become impressive. You spent years becoming dependable. In the end, dependable mattered more. The world celebrates loud victories. Life rewards quiet discipline. You understood that before I ever did. Every morning you chose consistency instead of excitement. Every setback became another lesson instead of another excuse. Every disappointment became another opportunity to grow instead of another reason to quit. That's what separated us, not intelligence alone, discipline, humility, perspective. I thought success belonged to the fastest. You knew it belonged to the most consistent. You weren't afraid to start over. I was afraid of looking like a beginner. That fear cost me years. You never let your ego become larger than your purpose. I did. And ego always collects expensive lessons. The remarkable thing is that even now, after everything I've learned, I still find myself remembering conversations we had years ago, words that made little sense then suddenly make perfect sense today. It's amazing how truth matures inside us. Sometimes understanding arrives long after the conversation ends. That's exactly what happened. You planted ideas, life watered them, time allowed them to grow. Today I finally see the forest that once looked like random trees. You weren't trying to win arguments. You were trying to protect possibilities. You weren't trying to appear intelligent. You simply valued wisdom more than recognition. I wish I had understood that earlier. Maybe I would have made fewer mistakes. Maybe I would have avoided unnecessary pain. Then again, perhaps those mistakes were the only language I was willing to understand. Experience became my teacher. Humility became my graduation. Now when I face uncertainty, I no longer rush to prove that I'm right. Instead, I pause. I observe. I ask questions. I listen carefully. In many ways, I've begun following the example you quietly demonstrated all along. The greatest lessons rarely arrive through dramatic moments. They arrive through ordinary choices repeated consistently over time. That's exactly how you changed my perspective. Not through force. Not through fear. Not through perfection. Through example. Today, if someone asked me what true intelligence looks like, I wouldn't describe the person with the highest grades, the loudest opinions, or the quickest answers. I'd describe someone who remains calm under pressure, someone who values truth over ego, someone who keeps learning even after becoming successful. Someone who admits mistakes without making excuses, someone who understands that wisdom often whispers while pride shouts. That person reminds me of you, and maybe that's why this realization took me so long. The smartest people rarely announce how smart they are. They simply continue growing while everyone else is busy competing. Looking back, I can finally say something that my younger self never would have admitted. You really were ahead of me, not because you wanted to be. Because you chose growth while I chose certainty, you chose patience while I chose speed, you chose understanding while I chased recognition. Today, I don't see that as a defeat, I see it as one of the greatest gifts life ever gave me. Because recognizing someone else's wisdom doesn't make me smaller, it gives me the chance to become wiser myself. So if you're reading these words, know this: never underestimate the quiet people, never mistake patience for weakness, never confuse humility with insecurity, and never assume that the person speaking the least understands the least. Sometimes the quietest person has already seen the ending while everyone else is still trying to understand the beginning. Maybe that's what real wisdom has always looked like, not standing in front of everyone demanding attention, but quietly walking ahead, leaving